Welcome everybody to Rolling Away the Stone conversation about emerging transgender identities in the church. My name is David Weekly and I'm serving as the moderator for this panel. We met yesterday and we discussed what a complex topic it is. So we have come up with 3 questions that our panelists are going to talk about in conversation. And so I'd like to share the questions with you, and then we'll turn the microphone over to them. We have 2 folks who are going to do a little opening statement to kind of explain the context that we understand this topic to live in. The questions that we're going to be discussing today is, what is your story? Where did you start and where are you now? Okay. And then what aspects, what kind of factors, such as your age, your affections orientation, your class, race, regional location, physicality, or any other conditions that have played a part in your journey? How have those things been a part of your journey? And then the final question is, what part or parts of your faith or spiritual practices have shifted since living into your truest self? Okay, and following the conversation, there'll be time for questions and answers. And we'll do that in kind of a popcorn fashion, okay? So welcome, and welcome to our panelists. I will let them introduce themselves in the conversation. Okay.
I'm Avery Value, and I will create a quick nest here, and then we'll start with that. I guess that first question, right, about who we are and what's our story. So you'll be hearing more about me, but Lewis and I in conversation, and all of us yesterday wanted to create a bit of a nest for this conversation to say that we do not represent all trans people. And each of us has multiple identities, and I'm sure all of us will be sharing about those multiple identities. However, we cannot even represent all of those communities to which we belong. And that oftentimes within our movements, and I think especially at this moment in time around transgender identities, and it has been this way for many years, Lewis can speak more to that than I, that frequently there's an effort to create a meta-narrative so that transness is easy to understand, and that is not what we are about together today. That we want to live into the complexity, to complexify this topic, and be comfortable living together in that complexity, and in the places where there are still growing edges, and where oppressions show up in the way that our own community operates, things such as white supremacy and racism, and misogyny and sexism show up within our own community, and that those things are present. And so that is our context that we are living in, and we're going to resist that urge because we each feel it too. I will say I feel it. I don't want to speak for us and create a meta-narrative for the panel. I feel an urge to create a meta-narrative to explain myself frequently, so I will be resisting that, and my fellow panelists have shared they will do the same.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Lewis Mitchell, and I live in Springfield, Massachusetts, and in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Don't ask me to explain that in this moment. I think the thing that I most want to encourage you to think about and maybe feel into is, often when we talk about LGBTQI, we talk a lot about intersectionality. I want to leave an image with you. How many of you are from LA or at all familiar with LA, Los Angeles? Okay. Crenshaw and Rodeo Drive don't intersect.
In any kind of way, anywhere.
So often when we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about it as though it's a possibility. But some of our experiences do not intersect. They're not going to intersect. And no matter how many posters you make about them intersecting, the map will not change. Often what I find in our work together is Rodeo Drive is asking why Crenshaw isn't there. But Rodeo Drive is not at all comfortable leaving Rodeo Drive to go to Crenshaw. In this, as well as other conversations that we have over the weekend, those of you that are more Rodeo Drive, I'm going to need you to pack a lunch and get ready to travel over to Crenshaw. Which means you'll be scared and uncomfortable because you've believed every little bullshit thing they told you about Crenshaw. But understand that even with your fear, you'll be safe. Crenshaw will not be safe on Rodeo Drive.
Amen.
You need to know that because we can't have real conversation without the discomfort of having real conversation. And I'm going to try to say this as diplomatically as humanly possible, which is not necessarily my superpower. We have gotten so uncomfortable with the notion of discomfort. We cannot build the kind of beloved community that we like to claim without a great deal of discomfort. You don't have to be alone in the discomfort, but you have to be prepared for it. Yes?
For those of us who are not familiar with LA,
All right.
what does Crenshaw Drive signify?
Well, Rodeo Drive. Crenshaw just gets to be a boulevard. Where do you live?
Here in St. Louis.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out, anybody from St. Louis give me an analogy on that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought you were asking all of us who are from St. Louis.
So I'll give you an example. So Crenshaw Boulevard runs it's a very long street in Los Angeles, and it runs through very many communities. Many of them are communities of color. Some of them would have to work their way up to being working class. Rodeo Drive is in Beverly Hills. If you've seen 90210, which is interesting because in the news you'll see Rodeo Drive, and you'll also see Crenshaw, but they will not show you families in Crenshaw. They'll show you chalk outlines in Crenshaw. But there are families in Crenshaw. But there's a narrative about who lives where and who lives how that is not just racial. It also plays a part in how we see LGBTQ. And I'll say one final thing and I'm going to pass the mic along. Just as an FYI to those of you who are not anywhere on the trans spectrum, we are not just our genders. We also have affectional orientations. I like that better than sexual orientation, which is why I use it, because love is not about sex. And we get very confused about sexual orientation because then we become our parts and our pieces and our partners. But love is much bigger than that. So we have an affectional preference, so you please try not to say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and straight. Because there are plenty of straight trans people. They're not on the outside of the circle until you put them there. And if we're making the circle and putting them outside, then we are not really being inclusive in intersectionality. And we're not doing that thing that we claim that we like to do. So I'm going to allow y'all to move into the questions, and I'm hoping that Malcolm arrives. Just as an FYI, Malcolm, who's our other panelist, he landed, he's just coming in, and we are just starting, Malcolm. Your timing is extraordinary. Come on up. I was just about to say that you were running a bit late, and then you came in the door.
And so I'm going to pass the mic down. We're just going to do brief introductions and then the questions, right? I forgot to mention my context as to where I'm coming from. So I'm Avery Bellew, and I'm a third-year student at Identities School in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm a student pastor at a UCC church in Dallas. So that's briefly my context.
Hello, I'm Nicole Garcia. I live in a little town called Louisville, Colorado, which is just outside of Boulder. And I'm a candidate for ordained ministry in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the LGBTQIA. And as such, I am currently serving as a pastoral intern at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Littleton, Colorado, which is on the south side of the Denver metro area.
Hello, I'm Gwen Fry. I'm an Episcopal priest from the Diocese of Arkansas, and my current ministry is with the trans community in the state of Arkansas. When I came out and socially transitioned, I lost my position within 1 week. So I have found a new ministry that I absolutely adore, and I'm thriving working with the trans community in Arkansas.
My name is Malcolm Himshoot, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and my work in ministry right now is with the United Church of Christ denomination, one part of the team that supports our thousands and thousands of ordained and licensed and commissioned ministers, of whom we have growing numbers of trans people in all those categories day by day. So I was originally from Colorado. Just want to put that in there because it's the best state to be from. But now I can.
I liked you and everything. So we're just kind of answering the questions, not necessarily one by one, but kind of as they speak to our spirits. And you can wait a moment or whatever. So
Shall I tell a little bit of my story? I mean, everybody, all trans people, you know, tell their coming out story and transition story, and it's all about that. But my story starts out when I was an adolescent. And you need to understand that I grew up in a very close-knit, tight-knit German family in the greater Cincinnati area, okay? One of the absolute must things to do every single week is the entire extended family would come together at my grandmother's house and visit and spend time together. And one Saturday that was the case, and we were all sitting there in my grandmother's living room, and you know, folks were pulling in chairs from the dining room and the kitchen. We were all sitting there kind of cheek to cheek. And whenever we got together, there was a sporting event of some type that was on. And this one particular Saturday, it just happened to be a tennis tournament. And what caught my ear was the fact that there was a controversy happening at this particular tennis tournament. And it was all because Renee Richards had entered the US Open. At that moment, that which I could not identify within myself, that spark of life, ignite. 30 seconds later, my aunt turns to the family and says, "He's a freak." And my dad says, "He's a monster." And just as quickly as that spark ignited, it was snuffed out. Because I didn't want to be a freak or a monster. That stayed with me for a long time. I tried everything possible to not have those feelings, not have that identity for decades. I played football in high school, you know, ran with a rough crowd, was called to the ministry, got married in course while at seminary, had a daughter. I mean, all of these things I was hoping would take away who I truly was inside. It never worked. Long time in therapy, I was finally able to accept the person that I am, and I was able to see myself as and accept myself as a trans woman. That's the beginning of the transition, and I'll leave it at that.
I was thinking of how many times I've been on a panel or in front of a microphone and shared the various stories. In 2001, so I'll just try to say some history. I'm curious into the present day. In 2001, there was a convening of trans-identified people in the United Church of Christ for some purpose of naming needs together and beginning ministry. And Bill Johnson called that together as a convening, trans-convening. 3 years later, we were rolling footage for a movie. No, it was not a movie. It was going to be this little VHS that, you know, has talking heads, and they're very informative, and people learn things from them. And one of those. But then I found out, no, actually, it was supposed to be a 90-minute long documentary, and it was all about me. So it became Call Me Malcolm, and it went live in 2005 to theater audiences. The year after that, on DVD, it went to church audiences, and everybody in between, from youth groups in the community, youth groups in churches, colleges, universities, seminaries. So the idea of breaking down the isolation that a lot of us trans people had identified one to another in 2001 from across, from within a lot of different kinds of gender diversity. Became an educational program, Educate the Church, on gender diversity. And I felt kind of lonely in the years that followed being on that speaker circuit, except that everywhere I went, I found more of us. And so rooms like this, I'm looking out and I'm seeing the brightness and the power of community. And I learned that even though, in the UCC I might have been one of the few identified trans ministers, there were organizing types of ministers, gender nonconforming and trans ministers, already in the UU, already in the MCC, already in the Presbyterian Church USA, Karen Swenson. So from Philadelphia to San Francisco, there was more organizing that was happening across the faith landscape. And I got to see that. So it was pretty cool in the end that I was in that seat where, because of name recognition, I got to go and realize just what was going on, and that it was truly a movement moment. And sometimes it took place in LGBT conferences, and sometimes it took place in trans-specific health organizations, for instance, or health conferences. So about the ministry changed for me in that before and after the movie and so on, and being seen as someone who could only do a specific kind of ministry, educational ministry on gender, versus being minister of word and sacrament and the different things I thought that meant going into it. It continues to change and develop, and I think that a life in ministry is never going to be only just one thing. But yeah, so that's some of the journey since 2001. 2005 was an interesting year because it was pre-YouTube and Facebook being totally huge like they are now. So the DVD continues to be used because that's church time. Churches might have a DVD player in out-of-the-way places where they don't have streaming Wi-Fi. But there's a lot more that happens today on social media, and I look around at the people who are trailblazing that, and I give thanks to God for that.
I was born the oldest son in a Roman Catholic Latino family. I had a very special place in the family. My father was killed in a car accident when I was 2. My mother remarried when I was 5. And all of my cousins sat at the kids' table, but I never did. Because I was the oldest son, I always sat next to Grandpa. I had a special place in that family. And we had a very close-knit family. The Mexicano families in the Boulder area, most of them moved in to the Boulder area in the 20s and 30s and 40s. My father's side of the family came up from Las Vegas, New Mexico, starting in 1919 to work the fields in and around Boulder. My mother's family came up from Walsenburg area. They were actually Italian. My great-grandfather was Giovanni Lorenzi, but he married Edwige and Lucero. And Grandpa was a farmer, was a rancher actually, and when my uncles went into the army in 42, they moved into town, and Grandpa just worked the coal mines full-time in Boulder County. So I had a special place in the family, and I loved my church. I loved being Catholic. I loved praying the rosary. I remember my first memories of my grandmother was, my grandma Celia Garcia, was when they were at the farm, and we would spend at least a couple, 3 weeks each summer at the farm with Grandma and Grandpa. And I remember getting up early one morning, and on the radio, this little radio they had in the kitchen, Paco Sanchez was saying the rosary. So the first memories I have are my grandmother on a cold morning kneeling on a linoleum floor saying the rosary. And I still have the rosary she gave me that must be at least 60 or 70 years old, that was worn with use when I got it. And I prayed the rosary on that for as long as I can remember. And I finally retired that rosary, and I carry another one with me all the time. But the church was a part of my life. It's who I was. And then when I ended up growing up and doing everything I was supposed to do as the oldest son, but never feeling that I did it correctly. Always felt like I had to watch other people, watch my uncles and watch my cousins, and mimic what they did to the best of my ability, but never feeling comfortable doing it. I went to college, and I went to CU Boulder starting in 1978. Now you have to remember, Boulder all through the 60s and into the 70s became a hotbed of social action. We were the Berkeley of the Rockies. There were riots constantly from about 1968 through 1974. The Chicano Studies students took over the financial aid office in 1974, and six Chicano activists were murdered by the FBI and Boulder PD. They will deny it, but in my heart I know they were murdered for the work they were doing to try and get Chicano students onto campus. So when I entered CU Boulder, I entered with a newly designated program, the Chicano Studies program. I was automatically placed into the United Mexican American Student Association. And the one thing that the Chicano Studies program was against was the church, because of the colonization of our people. I was a colonized individual. My family became citizens by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. So the border moved over us. And we all became Catholic because we had no choice. And so I started to really question the church itself. And I was also becoming very angry at God because I was praying every day for these feelings that I had inside me that would not be taken away. I just wanted to be the man everybody expected me to be, but I didn't know how to do it, and I prayed to be healed, I prayed to be fixed. And so between the church colonizing and oppressing me and my family, my ancestors, and God saying, no, I'm not going to grant your prayers, I'm just like, well, forget it. I walked away from the church. I was angry at God. So through most of the 1980s, I ended up a lost child in Boulder, Colorado. Could do a lot of stuff in the 1980s in Boulder, Colorado. And a lot of it found its way into my body. And so from what I remember, I think it was a good time. But I also know that I always had a girlfriend to take to the family gatherings. Half the time I had a boyfriend. I didn't quite know, I had no concept of what I was feeling. I thought I was gay, because that was just starting to become a thing. And I would wake up with people I didn't know wearing clothes that I had no idea where they came from. And so in 1989, I woke up in detox and realized that something had gone terribly wrong with my life. So that was my first foray into sobriety. So I started going to AA, grudgingly accepting the fact that God was going to be in my life, but as long as God stayed on God's side and I stayed on my side, then I could recognize that God was in my life. I ended up finding a beautiful woman who fell in love with me, and I got married. And then I heard rumors in the family that people were surprised that I married a woman because they had seen me out with men all the time, so they thought I was gay. So I had to confront those rumors. So the best way to do that is to go into a profession where you could be a man. And I ended up getting my certification to be a police officer, and the first department that hired me was the Department of Corrections. So I ended up working in a state prison. Now, a lot of the correctional officers who work there are ex-military. You get these guys who go into the Army and the Marines and the Navy when they're 18, they come out, they retire when they're 45, and they're too young to retire, so they go back into something that they're good at. They put on a uniform and learn how to march prisoners around. And I learned to be a man from Sergeant Gonzalez, Gunny. Gunny was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant. He taught me how to walk, he taught me how to talk, he taught me how to march, and he taught me to enforce discipline without leaving any marks. And that's what I did. So I did that for 5 years. No one likes being in prison, so I was able to get out on parole. So I ended up being a parole officer. So during the years in prison, I worked second shift, so I worked 2 to 10, and I usually had Monday and Tuesdays off, so I rarely saw my wife, which was really good for keeping the marriage together. And then once I came out on parole, I was working kind of 8 to 5, I had weekdays off, and realized that the main reason that I liked being married to the woman I was married to is because she was tall, gorgeous, and we could wear the same size clothes. Well, when we were around all the time and seeing each other, we realized we had nothing left in common. I was incredibly angry at her because she didn't fix me. She didn't take away those feelings I had inside. And we just had nothing left in common. I started drinking again because going to work, putting on the uniform, wearing the facade all day, coming home and taking it off, the only thing I could do to relax and feel normal again was to invite a friend over, Jack Daniels. So I was drinking a lot. I was very unhappy with everything. When she said I want a divorce, it was like, okay, that's fine. I bought a house, moved out, and a month later I'm sitting in my living room trying to decide whether I'm going to shoot myself under the chin or inside the head because I'd walked away from everything I was supposed to have. We both made really good money. I was well respected as an officer. I had a new car, and I walked away from everything I was supposed to have. Why did I do that? But I knew I couldn't take my own life. That's when I went back to Jesus. But it wasn't one of those, oh, Jesus, Jesus, help me, help me. It was more like, all right, you SOB, if I'm going to come back, you better step up this time. 2 days later, I'm sitting at my desk, and this was in like November. And the holidays are a horrible, horrible time for anybody in the prison system. That's when the people I was supervising realized that they had messed up their lives, that they were not going to be with their parents because they burned that bridge. They're not going to be with their kids because baby mama can't stand them. And what do? They go back to their friends, Jack Daniels and cocaine and methamphetamine. So most of November, December, what we do as parole officers is kick open doors, take people to jail, and January and February, we just send people back to prison. It's not a really fun existence for anybody. So the Colorado State Employees Assistant Program sent out a message. 2 days later, I'm sitting at my computer, and it says, are you suicidal, depressed, anxious? Give us a call. You can get 6 free sessions. I'm like, you were fast. And so I ended up finding this wonderful therapist, went to 3 sessions in 2 weeks, and she told me, I think you need some long-term care. So I went to Kaiser, which was and found this wonderful young intern who I was just able to open up and talk to her and finally told somebody my dirty secret. I liked wearing women's clothing. And she referred me to support groups at the Gender Identity Center. And I went to a conference, it was in March of 2003, when I was sitting in a room listening to people tell their stories about being transsexual. I had gone to this conference barely acknowledging the fact that I might possibly be, but not convinced, might possibly be a cross-dresser. But I was sitting there hearing people tell their stories of being 5 years old and not knowing how to do what they're supposed to do and wanting to wear their sister's clothing, and I'm like, they're telling my story. I knew who I was at that moment. I had always been a woman. I just had to accept how God made me.
that story and all of these stories. So I'm taking a breath. So a few things, I guess, about my story. I will not tell my complete childhood story, but a few things that are probably helpful to know. I was raised in the Deep South, just below the Florida-Georgia line. So think more tobacco fields and cattle ranches than beaches and people in bikinis. To a family who had been in the Deep South and in Florida since the 1830s, so Deep South country folk. I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, which for folks who are, I hear in the room, you kind of know what that means, a very closed, insular, American religious denominations where it started, but they're global now, and was deeply, deeply devout and involved, and loved that community. It was my family and it was all of my friends, because when you're raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you do not and are not allowed to have friends with anyone who is worldly. And a few things I think that are pertinent. My coming out story is complicated, and I hope it will display a little bit of the complexity of our journeys. I knew from an early age that gender difference was not accepted. My father was a very feminine man, and I was made fun of as a child because my father was a feminine man. People would make fun of me because my father was feminine. I still don't know all of my father's story, and probably never will, as to what that meant for him. But I knew in the culture in which I was raised that there was something very intrinsically wrong about that. And I was taught by him that I needed to not be feminine, because it would be hard for me. So one of the earliest memories I have in relationship to my body was at a very young age, my father seeing that I moved my body in a feminine way, naturally. That was what was natural. And trying to train me to move my elbows out from my body and gesture with big sweeping. Obviously, I still can't do it. Like that's what it was supposed to look like in my mind, because I held my elbows in and my hands out. And there are social cues that when we look at people's bodies, that we use to kind of think about body language. And I did all of them in a naturally feminine way. And I was taught that I was not supposed to be doing that. So I became at a very young age very self-aware about my body and felt uncomfortable and like I didn't fit in my own flesh. I did not have the word transgender and did not know what transgender was. And I came out first as gay. And the journey of doing that was very, very complicated, because I knew that whatever coming out was going to look like when I came out, I was going to lose everything. I was going to lose my faith and my faith community and my family. And I had 2 different appointed positions in the church. I preached on Sundays, and I was a traveling preacher. I was a little bit of a child prodigy. I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I was traveling throughout our circuit preaching, and I knew I would lose all of that. So I found my way to the side of a mountain in North Carolina, where I was an undergraduate at Appalachian State University, and I had stopped praying long before, even though I was still preaching. And I sat on the side of the mountain, and I had decided to jump. And I decided that I was going to make it look like I was hiking and I fell, because that did happen to people in that area. It's not unbelievable. So I thought, well, it looks like I'm hiking, that way my family won't know, and it will be easier for my family, because this will be so hard for me to come out as anything. It will be easier for my family if I am dead. And then they'll have the hope of the resurrection, because they'll think, well, they died in a tragic accident and at least they'll be resurrected. So they'll have comfort in my death. But I decided I would pray before I decided to jump. And my prayer was much like yours, Nicole, which was not, oh, please help me. It was, God, I need you to show up right now. I need to know. And now in the denomination I was raised in, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe that God shows up with signs and miracles any longer. Rather, unfortunately, it's kind of unfortunate. They think God does not show up. So I said, I know you don't do this anymore, but I need to know that you don't hate me for who I am. And as I was praying those words, a deer and a fawn walked out of the woods, and they just froze, and they looked at me, their big brown eyes. And it was as if I heard God say, I could not hate you any more than this doe could hate this little fawn. You belong to me, and you belong here, and you are part of all of this. And so we sat there and looked at each other for a long time, and then they turned around very quietly and walked back into the woods, and I got up, and I got in my car, and I had the courage to then come out and be disowned by my family and be rejected by my church. But I had that message in the back of my mind the entire time, that God had come to me on the side of the mountain and told me that I belonged. I think the last thing I'll say about kind of my coming out journey is that I lived for almost 10 years as a gay boy. And that is part of my history, and that is part of my story, and that is my community, and those are my people. And that very frequently, if there's one thing that we do in this thing that we call LGBTQ community, is that we do not talk about the complexities of that enough. I will say that being enculturated and loved by gay people and gay men and loving gay men, that I was taught transphobia in the bedroom, on social networking sites, in casual conversation. I was taught that more so than any other place I had been, I was taught transphobia. And so my journey with that, secularly too, at that time I was a speech therapist when I was coming out. And I actually was in a clinic that was very progressive, and I did voice and communication therapy with trans women. And I remember looking at them and going, I know that I am like them, and I am scared because I do not want to be trans. That looks so hard. And as I said, gay community did not help me with that fear. It made me more fearful. It made me more afraid, because I worked for a national LGBTQ org, and I saw how the gay movement worked and how decisions are made in boardrooms by primarily cisgender white gay men who have the funding, and that if you want a successful life in our LGBTQ community, the best thing you can be is a white gay man, which I was perceived to be. And so my story reveals some ugly truths, which is that I had such deep internalized transphobia, and that was affirmed and confirmed by my own community, who we're here together at this conference. And it's an ugly truth we have to face about each other. The last part I guess I'll say, just to say about where I've started, is that part of my journey was through community with other trans people, and sitting on the side of the street a little bit tipsy with one of my colleagues at a national LGBT org who was a trans woman, and saying to her, I just feel like, I really feel like I should be able to give birth, and it hurts me that I cannot. And she looked at me and said, you do realize that's what trans women say? And I broke down, and I cried. And it was her loving touch and the loving community of many others that helped me realize that I could overcome my own internalized fear of being a trans woman, and what that looks like and what that was going to mean for my life, which we'll get into, is not easy, and decide to take this leap, while still saying my life is complex and intersectional and not simple. It is not a simple story. And as to how I identify, which I think is important for me to state, I identify as trans femme, I identify as pansexual, I identify as polyamorous, and I still claim, as I said, I still claim the gay community as my own. I have not rejected that, even though sometimes the gay community rejects trans people or trans women as no longer a part of them. So those are some words I use that try to get to where I'm at. And I'll talk more about spirituality and religion and faith later.
I'm actually going to say something in a minute, but y'all are amazing. And just, wow, just all the, can we do this? Wow. You make me grateful that all of my suicide attempts failed.
Amen.
Because I wouldn't have gotten a chance to know you or me if they hadn't. So I'm going to do this in a very odd way because I really want to get everybody to do other things with other questions. So I'm going to run the litany. try to keep up. Take a deep breath, buckle in. I am a pansexual, non-monogamous, queer, black aware, hetero, emotional, and romantic, man of God, faith, and purpose, student of the journeys of Christ, who was raised as a girl, reared as a strong and proud butch, committed as a womanist, and seasoned as an agitator. I'm from a Baptist family who were raised in the South and migrated to California, who were very comfortable with respectability politics, but down to earth enough to know that you don't eat fried chicken with a knife and a fork. My family was raised in a church that was very family-centered, and when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that it was about a nuclear family, because in my community, your family may have all kinds of looks and things and such and whatnot, but we didn't judge it in a way. Nuclear families and fathers knows best, that was for y'all. You know, y'all people, you did that stuff. We might have had grandmama and Aunt Susie and somebody who was a cousin that wasn't really related to you, but that like, you just knew them forever, and that was our family. We were activists because the church was where activism happened. That's where your jobs happened. That's where you figured out where you could eat and where you could rent and where you could shop and who you could call in the middle of the night when the police didn't do you right, because the attorneys weren't going to help you either. All of those things were things that I thought that I was putting at risk with any of my comings out. Because I think for some communities, and I will speak to the black community specifically, the church isn't just where we worship. And if you were ostracized from the church, you might as well try to figure out how to be unblack. Because we didn't have the Elks Lodge and all the other stuff. We didn't have that stuff. We eventually got in some side door of that stuff, but even though I was raised in California and born in 1960, there was still a Southern 1945 way about my people. I was also raised as a middle-class child of working-class parents. My parents moved to the suburbs in 1970, and they were both working-class, blue-collar workers, but I was raised to be middle-class. My class consciousness was a hot mess until I was in my early 20s. I thought, oh, wow, I'm an ass. Well, okay, let me check that out. My head is one that is filled with ideas. I learned to read at 3, and I think probably once I got out of elementary school, I haven't really been a good student since then. And I'm telling you this because I need to tell you also the things that I'm most deeply ashamed about. I want to have transparency with you so that when I give you the blues about stuff that you might be ashamed about, we'll be able to share that we've shared some shame. I have a high school diploma and a gazillion dollars worth of student loan debt. I started at Andover Newton in 2005, and I haven't finished yet, and I might finish between now and death. We don't know yet. What I do know is that every single time I go to seminary to be credentialed like y'all people, I don't have the time to study ministry because I have a community that counts on me to do ministry. I have people that are dying by the dozens every year, that are hiding, that are afraid, that are not in these rooms this weekend. Although they are faithful Christians in their settings, I need to be there for them. I have not yet had a seminary teacher explain to me how a 6-pack of dead German theologians is going to help me minister on the corner of Crack and Crotch. And until that happens, I can't study what you can't teach me. I have to just go do what God has called me to do. My heart yearns to be present in my incarnation and with my full truth. What that means for me is I'm not going to pretend that I've tidied up nicely so that you feel comfortable. Honestly, I don't give a shit if you feel comfortable. What I know is that I am that holy hybrid. I am embodied and inspirited. I am sacred and I am carnal. And I am unashamed to be any of those things because I am exactly as divine order has purposed me to be, to speak to the people who are not clean enough to talk to you. Because there's a whole lot of people that have been taught like I was taught that God couldn't and wouldn't love them. And in many moments, I am the one that they feel safe enough to come to. That I can say, I don't know what your grandmama told you, but God made you. And God loves you just the way you are. You a hot mess? Don't think that's a surprise to God. Let me show you some stories in the Bible. They were all a hot mess. There are no exceptions. They were all messy. We might have tidied it up on Sunday so we don't hurt nobody's feelings, but if there had been pharmaceuticals, they would have all been on them. My body has been one that is both scarred from surgeries of my own choosing, scarred from rapes and assaults and abuse from my own addiction and alcoholism. And every scar does not mean that I have been deeply wounded. It means that I have been a courageous survivor. I wear every scar proudly. I have body dysphoria. And what that means is that sometimes the body that I've always dreamt myself to have is not the one I look at naked when I get out of the shower. But for anybody else that's 57, I'm guessing that's probably true for you too. I'm just saying gravity will take care of everybody. Time and gravity will catch us all. My blackness and my maleness are my greatest anxiety producers in the world. When I am out in the world, I have the good fortune of blending, which means that people don't look at me and wonder what my birth certificate said. That's a fortune, that's a gift, and that's a grace that many of my siblings in trans communities do not have. It also means that I'm a suspect. Always, everywhere. People talk about the South, but in my experience, the South is the entire United States. I live in Massachusetts. I'm no safer there than I would be in Birmingham. I assure you of that. The hard part about that is that my second greatest anxiety is the ways in which my truth and my embodiment make me uncomfortable being in rooms full of you. Because when I'm here with you, the expectation, either yours or mine, is that I will be assimilated, somehow excused, explained with an in spite of, or in some kind of weird spiritual way that says, you know, he's okay if only. If he could just stop cussing, if he would just tidy up, if he would just, you know, finish his ordination, if he would just wear the shawl, if he would just stop talking about this non-monogamy business, if he would just stop being such a hoe, you know, really, all those things that are a part of my life. And I'm not cleaning it up for any of you because ultimately, at the end of the day, I will tell you the same thing I told my mama's pastor after he preached his Adam and Eve and Adam and Steve sermon when I was visiting one Sunday. I went up to him and I said, I'm so glad that you preached. And the one thing that blesses my heart, that makes me want to run and shout and spit on the ground, is that you're not God and your opinion doesn't matter. I feel the same way about all of you. The God that has raised me and saved me and purposed me to do this thing which I do not want to do. I call my calling a dragging. I have run until I am all out of energy. And probably 2 or 3 years ago, I said, fine, dear God, will you please just lighten up? I don't even want to do this, but if you insist, fine. And I said yes yet again. The yes I said when I got sober, I didn't know that God meant all this. I didn't read the fine print. My spirit is one that has been entrenched in amazing grace and just as I am. And what I learned and was taught was that God couldn't have loved someone like me. I was told that God couldn't or wouldn't love me, so I left the church and I went on a quest for something else. And I found, just much like you, Nicole, I found my spiritual awakening in Jack Daniels. Jack was my buddy. I got drunk, really drunk one week, and I'll tell you this very brief story. I was in a blackout because blackout drinking was my superpower. And so I decided in this blackout that what my real calling, my true journey in life, was to work for Jack Daniels.
Yeah.
And as I was heading to hitchhike from Los Angeles to Lynchburg, it occurred to me that I probably shouldn't live in any place called Lynchburg. So what happened was, as I was running from God and running from church and running from organized religion, because y'all all sucked and I didn't trust any of you, I did like the pageantry and that was lovely. I got ambushed by the power of Yvette Thunder's spirit. I was in a political meeting in San Francisco and I had done what I normally do. I had ranted and railed and cussed and screamed and carried on. And Yvette came in and she said almost the exact same things that I said, only with great power and conviction, not one cuss word, and with love. And I thought, I don't know who you are, but I need to go where you go and get some of that. And that was how I got reintroduced to City of Refuge. And that was how I got introduced to the United Church of Christ. Fast forward a little bit longer, I moved to New England because I fell in love, and love makes you do strange things. So I ended up in New England looking for a church home, and I found First Church in Springfield and Pastor Tom Goff, and I began to have a relationship with the United Church of Christ, which is much like most of my relationships in that it's a love-hate relationship. I don't hate the UCC. I hate that the UCC has not yet consistently lived into all that it says that it does. I want it to be better, I expect it to be better, and I work for it to be better. But this is what I will not do. I will not pretend it's better because it makes you feel good. I won't ever do that. Because I love you enough to want us to get there together. The final thing I'm going to say about who I am, I don't know that I'll ever be a great theologian. I don't know that I'll ever be a great minister or a great pastor. I strive to be a great father to my amazing 5-year-old daughter, and I strive to be a great servant to my community with love and conviction and the possibility that whatever energy you believe in also believes in you and wants you not only to be self-loving, but has armored you to love someone else in your own unique way. And if somehow I can do that, I guess the upshot of all of this is this transness stuff is a lovely division. I guarantee you that when you were 10 years old, you had no idea what you'd be like right now. You have also transitioned in some ways. Amen. Things have drooped and dropped, and things of all kinds of things have moved around. You figured out what stuff did, and thought, "Ooh, Lord, I didn't know it did all that," you know. And so we've all had some movements, but we get so caught up in our parts and pieces while going to the old school religion that tells us we shouldn't even be embodied or have a love of our bodies and how they feel, which is ludicrous. What is the point of having an embodied Christ if our bodies and our spirits are supposed to be separated? Bad theology all the way around. All I'm saying to you is, what I need you to understand about transness, my transness, is that that's not the entirety of who I am. It never has been, it never will be. And if that is your singular focus to make you feel more inclusive, then you're already on the wrong track. I need you to know the things that affect me most deeply, and I need you to know the things that affect you most deeply if we're going to build relationship.
Okay, thank you all very much. And we have time. I want to leave time for questions and answers, but I would like to just have you answer briefly, if you could, or pass if you would rather not. What parts of your faith or your spiritual practices have shifted since you've moved into your truest and most authentic self?
I wrote some really, really bad poetry, all during transition. My transition from feminine to masculine expression, and yeah, that was fun. But I'm coming up on, I'm gonna shift now in the middle of my life. I'm gonna write really, really bad songs. So just wait. We gotta do some singing.
Oh my goodness, you were so fun.
This is a difficult question for me. The Episcopal Church is the reason I am the person I am today. And that comes with good and bad. Back in 2012, the Episcopal Church had a general convention in which they passed a resolution which enabled gender identity and gender expression to be part of the anti-discrimination canons of the church. One of the things that I feared growing up was that I would lose everything. And this gave me cover until it became a reality. And when the church passes laws and canons and resolutions that say they support, and then they turn around, and when it's on the ground in the parish, they don't support, That's a very, very difficult place to be. That's the bad news. But the good news out of the bad news is the fact that in that cycle for me, in that cycle, I came out to the church I was working in, and within a week I lost my job. Just like that. The good news of that is that my spirituality and my identity for the first time in my life came together. My religious life moved from, be honest with you, worshiping the parish and the church, to finding out who this radical individual is that we are all called to follow. And I found that person through my experience of coming out and socially transitioning.
People often ask me, well, or tell me, Nicole, you must have this deep, abiding faith. And I say, no, I have a very tenuous relationship with Jesus. Because I'm always fighting to get what I want, and it never works. I'm always disappointed. But when I give up and give in and let Christ guide my life, things happen. People have appeared in my life that I have no idea how they are here or why they are here, but they have given me so much. Incredible friendships with David and Deborah have kept me going for a long, long time. Leo didn't know that when he was working for Wingspan all those years, that he would create a place for me in the ELCA, being called by Barbara to be told and given this opportunity to be part of the 2015 Trans-Seminarian cohort. I had no idea what to do, what I was supposed to do. End up in the mountains of North Carolina, of all places. That's where I needed to be, because that's where Christ was taking me. And I fight it, tooth and nail, every day. No, Lord, I need to be doing something else. I need to be moving. I need to put my name out there, but it's not about me. It's about giving up who I am, because I have been transformed by the Spirit. I cannot create faith. The faith has been bestowed upon me. My faith was rekindled, and I knew I had to go back to the church. I was at that workshop back in 2003, where God put Renee in my life. Renee was an Aurora police officer who was also transitioning. And I told Renee, I want to go back to church, but I couldn't go back to my Catholic church. Not because I was trans, but because I was divorced. And Renee invited me to this Lutheran church, and of course I said no, because I could not go to the church of the excommunicated heretical priests. After the third time Renee asked me, I got over myself, walked into St. Paul Lutheran Church in downtown Denver, and they celebrated High Church. I knew all the words, but they didn't make me kneel. I found a place to celebrate my faith once again. I wasn't looking for it. It was given to me. And then I was discovered by Lutherans Concerned North America, and they taught me how to tell my story. They taught me how to create and present workshops. So I was shipped around the country because, frankly, I was a good token. I had a brown face. I had a person of incredible faith. I'm articulate and incredibly pretty. My therapist told me at one time I had to have more self-confidence. I followed her advice. And it was at a point where I realized that I have a gift and talent that the Holy Spirit has given me, and I use it whenever I need to or am called to. And I don't know why I am here, but I am. And if any of my words can open a door in your heart to let you know that we are all God's children. We are siblings of Christ. We walk with Christ, and we have been transformed by Christ because we are loved by God.
I'm not going to give you a homily like that. I felt like I needed to pray a prayer after that. I think succinctly the things that I feel like have shifted or I have learned. One is being more comfortable with unknowingness, because when you take the journey of going through your life and feeling that you know so many things that you can make definitive statements about, and then learning that you cannot, it has taught me something about God, because God is present in my unknowingness. So to learn to be comfortable, try to be comfortable not knowing, and know that that too is from the divine. The other thing is to learn to be comfortable with anger and find that it is holy. Because, as Gwen articulated, I found my way after I left, was kicked out of Jehovah's Witnesses. I found my way to the Episcopal Church, and that place nurtured me and gave me life. And I am deeply troubled by the fact that the reality on the ground is not the same as things that we may pass at a national level. And as someone who feels and has always felt called to ministry, I don't know that that is the space that I can be in ministry, and that grieves me, and it makes me angry. And I'll say as a charge and a concern that we are at a conference of many gay and lesbian people who fought hard for ordination for gay and lesbian people, for gay and lesbian leadership in the church. We need you to fight hard for us. We need you to fight hard for us. Your work is not done. You have privilege and power now. So don't be the one to tell us it is not yet your time, because that's what you were told. That's what you were told, but many times you're in the place of telling us not yet, not yet. And that is deeply disturbing. But that is true and that is real. That is our reality of many of us. So I am learning to appreciate the book of Job. And Job was angry, and yet in all of that he did not sin. And to learn to accept that and wrestle with that the way that Job did, and run the risk of being called an angry trans woman, and figuring out what to do with that theologically, and hoping that in some way that is going to be a gift that the church needs in some way, and God's people need in some way.
I feel like I've largely answered that question. Let me tell you the upshot of where I've landed now. I have learned more about God in 12-step recovery than I've ever learned in any church. And so, my desire is that church be more like 12-step recovery instead of the other way around. The other thing that I have learned is that every single word I might use to describe this divine energy is only limited by my view. Everything we've put in place to make God ours has made God too small. And so the expansiveness of divine is what I seek to live into. Just like every door has a key, the key to my door has been found through Christ. But there's more than one door. And one door is not superior to another door. I just need to know where my door is and how to hold my door open for those that would seek to follow me in that door. It doesn't mean that I block other people from their doors and beat them up with my key and all that stuff. I learned all that stuff being in Christian church, not being outside of Christian church, because I've seen how we do. We do some real damage in trying to do door guarding and don't go to that door is evil. Shut the hell up and go in your own damn door, you know? So, I mean, I think that really what I've learned in this, and this is not really about, this is less about transition and more about surviving LGBT politics for 30 years. Real talk, those who oppose us have not nearly done as much harm to me as you have. The scars that I have from working at the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center and being on the board of the task force and doing this kind of work for 30 years have wounded me deeply. You, who I lean into to trust, to hold my heart, have made me feel unseen, unworthy, and tainted. I love you in spite of how you've treated me, not because of how you treated me. And because I believe the God in you and the God in me still have relationship that gives us enough room to work on our relationship.
Let's thank our panelists before we do questions. So I want to thank you all. We have some time, a few minutes for Q&A, and so I'll bring the mic to you, and then if you just give your name so we know your name, and then your question.
Thank you. My name is Frank, and a number of years ago I worked for a behavioral health care company, and one of our client organizations had a trans person who was being kind of abused in the workforce, and I was asked if I would go, first of all, investigate the situation and go down and try to help this small office situation of about 20 people relate to the trans person. So I had to do some research in my company. At the time I knew nothing about transgender realities to speak of. Got a hold of the best people in our organization to expose me to the research that's been done, and I found it extremely helpful to learn about what people thought they knew about the interuterine development that seems to affect transgender realities. And whenever I've talked about this to people in the ensuing years, they find it incredibly understanding. They're like, why hasn't anyone ever told us this? Like some veil has been lifted. But I don't know what that's like from your perspective, and I'll bet you have some ideas about that. I feel like, as a church leader, what I would like to do is get pediatricians together, get fetal development experts together, and tell us what's going on in the womb that is sometimes affecting these realities. But I just don't know if you think that's a good approach or not.
Can I just say something really quickly? It's been a long time. It's been a long time since I've been in the uterus. That pediatrician has got nothing to tell you that I can't tell you. Those studies speak to a caricature of a person. If you want to have a relationship with a trans person, have a relationship with a trans person, not a study about a trans person. Getting lost in the studies will confuse you and will distance you from having a relationship with me.
Well, and something I would just add to that, because I'm a scientist, I have a science degree, is not a biologist, but some of those things, theories are helpful. I need them too to try to figure out things myself, right? And we are so diverse. I don't know that any theory is going to accurately explain all of our circumstances, and then what happens if one study explains my transness but not somebody else's on this panel, right? So what I would say is that because it's so complicated, certainly finding gateways for understanding are so important. However, I think a better gateway for understanding is storytelling. And that's why we decided to do the panel in the manner we did today, to tell our stories, because I think storytelling and relationship development, as you were saying, is so much more helpful than maybe saying, well, this study says this, though that can be part of the conversation if someone finds that meaningful. But to meet as people and to understand, how do you understand your experience? And again, when you've met one trans person, you have met one trans person. On that day, in that time, because that is all of us. You can see how diverse we are. And yes, gateways for understanding are important, but maybe the shift we can teach, because we are our experiences resist the meta-narrative in such a particular way as trans people, that perhaps one of our gifts to the world is to say, can we shift from trying to create a meta-narrative to understand an entire group, to shift into how do we have relationship together? And maybe that is one of the gifts of transness to the world, is let's do relationship together in a different way.
Frank, I just want to say this really quickly. I'm sorry that I just kind of exploded on you. It's one of those interesting things. Like, I remember back in the 70s, when people who were my friends who were straight and cis were talking about gay people and studies and trying to understand, well, you know, if this happens in the womb, then this is where that needs to go. And that had nothing to do with the affairs of the heart of two people who fell in love with each other. Our parts and pieces will never, ever adequately define our hearts and our spirits. And so I say that not to discount science, but we're not projects. We're not in petri dishes. We are people who are yearning for relationship with other people. Please don't let the study distract you from the relationship. That's a shortcut that might make you feel like an authority for a minute, but it will distract you from real relationships. And let me tell you why I say that. Because what happens often in academic world and in business worlds is we get really caught in the story and in the study, but we still don't get down to the nitty-gritty of the relationship. And I want to have a relationship, and other people want to have a relationship. The studies are great to have on your shelf and go, look, there are studies done that say this person's a real person. Then go get to know the person.
There's a lot of other questions too.
Well, we just need to extend it for 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. And so when a client will sit down and wants to know, well, did this happen intra-utero? Did it happen because my mother did this? What difference will it make in your life? We want to know why so many things happen. When I was a parole officer, I had a woman who had 4 sons, a doctor, a lawyer, a police officer, and a convicted felon who liked to steal cars and liked to drive fast. What was the difference? They were all brought up the same. Was it because she had a martini during one of the... I don't know, but doesn't matter. What really matters is how you approach that individual at that point in time.
Do either of you want to? Okay. My only comment to add to that last one was I remember I met 2 other trans folk from Cleveland, and we had a wonderful discussion wondering if it was the water. Yes. It was.
I teach a teenage Sunday school class at Central Christian Church in Terre Haute. 20% of the congregation is LGBT. LG. One of my high school boys came out as gay about 3 years ago. And this summer began the process of coming out as transition. It was announced at church. The next week there was a reception on the evening inviting her family and friends and the church there. Trans is something we're not real familiar with. What are the best things we can do to be real and open and to help Layla in this process?
Treat Layla as any congregation member you have. Use proper pronouns. Use the name that Layla wants. Respect where Layla wants to go to the bathroom. Don't exclude, include. Right now I sit on a gender task force for one of our Lutheran camps. And the camp director is just freaking out because they don't know what to do with a person who identifies as non-binary, transmasculine. Where is this person supposed to sleep? Where is this person supposed to take a shower? Where they believe they should. Leave it up to that individual. You don't have to start policing the bathrooms. Treat the person as a child of God as you would any other of your congregation members.
The other thing is, in addition to all those practical things, and it sounds like you're doing some really amazing things, I think frequently we can feel, I felt that I'm a burden in all those accommodations that they feel are made, that oh my goodness, the church is having to do so much and I'm a burden. So I think it's really important to look in her eyes and tell her that she is loved and that she belongs and that she is a blessing to your church. That everything you are going through together as a church because of her is a blessing to your church, and to let her know that she is not a burden but a blessing.
My name is Brett, and first of all, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your wisdom today. I have sort of a practical question, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how either or both the trans community and the church can be more inclusive of non-binary people, gender fluid people, gender non-conforming folks.
Hymns are our greatest enemy. We singing a hymn here, their brothers and sisters, mother and father, and I'm not even going to touch the Hispanic and Indian that is in one of them, where my entire being as a trans person was erased because I had to pick male or female, and the non-binary people are not even considered. So, you know, if you love the hymns, sing them, but leave out the verses that have brothers and sisters and mother and father.
Or just lesbian and gay.
Yeah, or just lesbian and gay. Yeah, we have to look at, you know, going through a liturgy, there is just so much heteronormativity in the liturgy. And so trying to take it all out, people get very, very protective of their liturgy. And so, yeah, trying to reach out to the non-binary, it's making you uncomfortable, not us. So deal with your discomfort and figure out that one, we're not trying to make you into anybody who you're not. God created us all in God's image, and they want us to pray together.
Very quickly, I want to introduce you to a term that you may not have heard, which is proper use of privilege. We talk a lot about privilege. We get really distracted talking about privilege and who has it and who doesn't have it, and I don't really have it compared to you. I want to talk about proper use of privilege. For me as a binary person, the proper use of my privilege is to correct people in situations where I am represented in the language and my non-binary siblings are not. I will interrupt in the middle of a sermon and go, "Not brothers and sisters, I got other options." And people fix it. Because in reality, you can have all the rainbow flags and pink and blue flags you want to, and in one sentence, you can let someone know they're not welcome. One sentence that you say mindlessly, thoughtlessly, without any regard. How do I know that? Because I've had to stretch to learn non-binary language because I'm binary. It was easy for me to go, I'm going from F to M. I have the luxury of knowing that there's an M that can put on my license. I have beloved ones that may not have that luxury in my lifetime. I need to advocate for them. That's the proper use of my binary privilege. And so the answer to your question is you keep advocating for you and allow us to keep advocating for you in the spaces where they won't tell you that they think you're being a bother. They'll tell me and I'll give them what for.
Can I say one thing just to add about that too? Is please, for those of us that are binary trans folks, tell us when we're doing it wrong and call us out on our shit. So we can do better.
I've been told I've ignored this side of the room. Are there questions? Yes.
Carrying on the non-binary, can you help me understand better plural they, them? And I have a horrible, difficult time to explain it because I don't get it. So what is they, them in terms of non-binary?
I'm going to offer to table that for now and just talk to you personally about it later so we can move on to other topics. Is that okay? Can you find me?
Anybody else need they, them?
Yeah.
Just
You know what?
Anybody else
We
has
can do a tutorial for that
Yeah.
later because that's really very simple. If you see a dog walking down the street and you don't know what gender it is, you say, hey, is that your dog? Are they with you? Y'all do it all the time. Don't act like it's rocket science. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Let's move on. No, it really is much simpler than you're making it. Hold that thought.
Okay.
I promise. I'll stay after.
And I need to honor our time. So we're running out of time. One more question. Is there anybody that really has something? Yes.
So, as coming up being transgender, I've had a lot of experiences where people go to try and fix my situation for me. I had a huge round of this when I was in seminary at the beginning. I'm still in seminary, partly because of this. And when I first came in, it was just like, everyone was like so eager to be helpful, so eager to make it all fit for me. And we hadn't figured out the whole non-binary thing, and we hadn't figured out, so I had to have an interview with everybody so I could tell them how to fix things for me. And it was incredibly difficult, and it made everything incredibly awkward. And I felt very, very loved and very, very out of place. So if you've had any similar experiences, to talk a little bit too, I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Malcolm? I'll take that in a certain direction and maybe wind back to some other things because I haven't spoken in a while. But I think of history and the kinds of histories that we can put in each other's hearing and in each other's hands, and where did this all begin and what language do we use for it? And if I read Les Feinberg early on. I read Kate Bornstein. Those are spiritual leaders, and in the arc that a vision that they cast and the path that they traveled, there's so much strength, and it's really not about being pitied or healed even. So finding the warrior or the diva, I don't know what Kate would go by, for the fierceness. Outlaw. There we go. Gender outlaw being her title. So yeah, just let's reach back there with our memories, our corporate memories, for what trans includes. It always didn't. Like, I'm an interloper as a transsexual type of person. My history is recent within all of that, and there might be a reason that language is changing again. I think the last decade really medicalizing the whole of what was under transgender has a lot to do with non-binary folks having to carve new language to again create the place. But the place has been and will be forged by the boldest, baddest, most amazing radical people. So thank you that I get to be in that lineage, in a small way.
David, I just want to say one thing about outness really quickly, because I think in LGBT settings, out seems to be like the gold standard, and come out. So there is a term called stealth, which I don't use because that seems sneaky. I prefer low and no disclosure. Every trans person does not choose to be out. That's really kind of this other standard that isn't a part of our lives. There may be many reasons that they choose low or no disclosure. It doesn't mean that they're ashamed. It doesn't mean that they're not proud. It doesn't mean that they're not community connected. But it does mean that you shouldn't judge someone's disclosure because it's not your choice. And so you need to respect that if someone chooses to trust you with their medical or gender backstory, it is not yours to announce, because now you know a trans person. My trans friend Bill said, no. And it also means that you don't say, oh, I hope you feel good enough to come out someday, because you're making a lot of assumptions about their level of disclosure and their choice and their agency. The reason why I say that is because, a lot of the LGBT stuff is really about flag waving and coming out day. But, that isn't a good look for everybody. And so we need to respect that they are a part of the community and they have a different disclosure choice. It doesn't mean they're in the closet. It means they've chosen low or no disclosure.
And the flip side of that same coin is the fact that, well, in my case particularly, I really had a coming out bash. I made the front page of the newspaper with 2 photographs that were picked up off of Facebook. I had, news crews sitting out in front of my house for 5 days waiting to catch a glimpse. And I was in the news cycle for all those 5 days. So that ability to just be myself and not disclose was taken away from me from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that there was so much violence that happened to me personally and my family, because my family went through it too. That that needs to be noted as well.
Thank you. So I am going to honor our time, and I believe we're at the end of our time. So thank you again to all of our panelists, and thank you for being part.
Actually, I'm going to do a layman tutorial for those of you that want to stay for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody who wants to stay, I have a feeling they're happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm going to wait because you get thanks to Amber.